Hello everyone. I'm still having trouble getting clips off of YouTube, and I'd rather not resort to pirating episodes of every anime that does this, but I know that if you've watched any anime from 10 years ago, you've seen this trope before. Imagine there's a teenage boy and a teenage girl. A strong wind blows up her skirt and the boy sees her panties. Or the guy trips on something, crashes into the girl, and lands on her boob. Or he walks in on her girl changing, and she beats him up for being a pervert. Or, in some cases, she walks in on him changing, and she beats him up for being a pervert yet again. I used to see more YouTube channels complaining about this specific trope plastered all over the internet. I know Anime America listed it as their #1 least favorite cliche in anime. I double-checked, and Emirichu and Wolfichu still have videos on their channels that include this as one of their top annoying tropes. I remember that there used to be others. Yeah, the title of this video is not an exaggeration. I firmly believe that this is, or at least was, one of, if not the most hated trope in all of anime. The website TV Tropes divides this into the accidental pervert, where the guy slips and falls into an awkward position, and the unprovoked pervert payback, the latter of which being cases where the guy in question didn't even do anything that could reasonably be interpreted as perverted, but got assaulted by the girl anyway. For our purposes, we're just going to lump the two together under the name of accidental pervert. Mostly because unprovoked pervert payback is a mouthful, and I'm not going to spend the rest of this video using the abbreviation UPP. Before we can fully understand this trope, we need to recognize that it isn't unique to Japanese media. It's just more common over there because of what their culture and their TV censors will let them get away with. The fact of the matter is that this trope is inherently sexual in nature. There's really no escaping that. Some cartoons in Western media have snuck things through the censors before, but every time one of them does, and the network finds out about it, they just get stringier about what you can show on a cartoon. Remember, Japan doesn't have the attitude that cartoons are a form of entertainment mostly for children like we do in the West. They also have a more lax attitude about innuendo in general. We do see this trope appear from time to time in the West, but it's very rare. The main reason the accidental pervert trope isn't common in Western media is because this trope generally offends women. More to the point, it offends feminists. Japan's history with feminism is very different than in America, and so they can get away with things that TV networks couldn't do here without getting their budgets cut. Feminists are fine with showing a character like Johnny Bravo harassing women and then getting his butt kicked. They are not fine with watching a guy who hasn't done anything wrong yet get the same treatment, because it means the woman in the show is the one who's in the wrong. But to truly get to the root of this trope, we need to know how old it actually is. Back in the day, by which I mean ancient Greece, there's an old story about a hunter named Actaeon. Now, some versions of this myth differ, but in the most popular version, Actaeon is out in the woods hunting with his dogs like any good hunter. And he walks into a grove where the goddess Artemis is bathing in a lake, or a waterfall. Sometimes her huntresses are there with her, but they're all nude, and Actaeon has at least seen Artemis nude, and she won't stand for that. Now Artemis is the goddess of the hunt. No mortal man can pose an actual threat to her. She could easily have drawn her bow and shot Actaeon before he had time to blink. But she doesn't do that. She does something else. She turns Actaeon into a stag, an animal that notably cannot really defend itself, neither verbally nor physically. Then his hunting dogs, his closest hunting buddies, see the stag and tear him limb from limb. There's a reason she chooses this method to kill Actaeon. And in the same part of the world, at around the same time, we have another myth. This one featuring Tiresias and Athena. Tiresias is famous for being a blind seer. But before he was blind, in one version of the myths, and yes, I know this is not the most common, but in one version, he was out for a walk one day and saw Athena bathing naked in a lake. She blinded him immediately, but after realizing it was an accident, she gave him prophecy as a form of apology. Note the difference in the severity of the two goddesses' reactions, and the fact that the goddess of wisdom apologizes when she realizes she made a mistake. There is one more story I have to tell you before we can piece together the puzzle of this trope, and why it was so common in anime for so long. Why, it even sneaks into Western media, such as the time Brian got pepper sprayed in Family Guy by a woman who had just attended a feminist seminar. See, like most Americans, I went to a public high school. And like everyone else I know who graduated from a public high school, I swore I would never go back, not even if you paid me. And then, when I graduated from college with an engineering degree and couldn't find a job, and the cost of driving several hours to job interviews with rising fuel prices was getting too high, I became a substitute teacher on the side for money. I went back to high school for less than minimum wage. But this time was different. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't a hormone-addled teenager anymore. Now I was an adult, surrounded by teenagers. You know that thing in a show where you see something once, and then you see it again later but with more clarity? Yeah, this was one of those times. I had that aha moment where everything finally made sense. Why does that accidental pervert cliche keep showing up in fiction, especially in fiction aimed at teenagers? Because it keeps happening in real life. It can be really easy for us adults with PTSD of our high school years to block that period of life out of our memories. You know, that most awkward part of our lives where everyone's bodies are growing into new proportions, new hormones and emotions we didn't have in grade school are rampaging through our heads, and we haven't learned to control any of it, and some of us still haven't learned how to use deodorant. And we're all forced to cram like sardines in a can through crowded hallways with incredibly short breaks between classes, where we have to run to our lockers, drop off books from the last class, grab the next class's books, and then run to the next class without getting caught by the hall monitor for running in the halls, and forget about bathroom breaks. Yeah, teenagers are going to bump into each other all the time, and they're going to be really confused all the time. And some of them are legitimately perverts. Most of them aren't. Most of the teenage boys that I saw were too scared to do anything genuinely perverted. Heck, if I opened the repressed memories in my own brain, I was too scared in high school to do anything like that. But I can also say that just about every guy I knew from when I was in high school was accused of being a creep, or a stalker, or a perv, or something along those lines back in those days. You might have noticed that most of the people I listed at the start of this video who've done their own videos on how they don't like this trope were women. I never hear guys complaining about the accidental pervert, or how it's a cliche, or how it's lazy writing. That's because we had to live it. Now, before every woman watching this video clicks off, or insists that they've never falsely accused any of the guys in their teenage years of being perverts, they only ever accused real creeps and stalkers. You know the old saying, no one ever thinks their own actions are evil? Well, no one ever thinks the people they accuse are innocent, either. And if they were always right, we wouldn't need a justice system. I've mentioned this in another video before, but it bears repeating here. Even in the best case scenario where a guy shows interest in a girl, and she rejects him, and he leaves without a fuss, that doesn't solve the girl's problem. Because the guy is like a hungry tiger to her. And while he might be civil and asking nicely for what he wants now, we know that won't last forever if he doesn't have any luck elsewhere. And he's already shown an interest in her specifically. Of course that makes her feel uncomfortable. Some women are going to feel uncomfortable just being around guys who are bigger than them, regardless of how they behave. But teenage boys, and by extension men, aren't tigers. They have those pesky things called human rights. You can't just call animal control and have them locked up or put down because their existence makes you feel uncomfortable. And when the guy hasn't even approached her, he's just visibly attracted to the girl, or she just thinks he's attracted to her, but she doesn't like him back, that's an equally awkward and uncomfortable situation. And the primal, monkey part of her brain is going to overreact, because in nature, back in the old days, the monkey who overreacted to things got to live, while the monkey who underreacted got eaten by a leopard. The first thing I've realized about this trope is that just because a trope is disliked by a lot of people, that doesn't make it bad. When I was 7, my family was between cable companies, and one of the few channels we had aired a lot of reruns of Johnny Bravo. I didn't exactly like watching Johnny Bravo that much as a kid. Many of the jokes went over my head, A lot of them just weren't funny even rewatching as an adult, and mostly I was just waiting for Scooby-Doo to come on afterwards. But I also understood that Johnny Bravo was not a role model. He got slapped, kicked, turned into a lizard in one episode, you know, the works. And while some of the show's messages didn't exactly age well, the one that obviously stuck with me is that you shouldn't act like this doofus whose attempts at hitting on women were about as smooth as low-grit sandpaper. And that's the thing about cringy tropes. Sometimes the cringe is intentional. Sometimes the point is to tell the audience, don't act like this person. This character is a loser. Nobody likes them. Guess what, ladies? That girl from the rom-com anime who beats up the guy for no reason other than because she's assumed he's a pervert? Yeah, you didn't like that girl. Don't be like her. She's your Johnny Bravo. But you might notice a sharp difference between the accidental pervert in fiction versus the version that happens in real life. In fiction, the girl gets violent. In real life, she usually just calls him a stalker and possibly reports him to the authorities and a whole bunch of other stuff that I'll get into later in this video. In at least one show, a girl cuts a guy's head off because he walks into the wrong room at the wrong time. What's up with that? Well, barring the real-life cases where a girl actually does get violent because she thinks the guy she's assaulting won't hit a girl in self-defense, these are meant to be exaggerations. And the thing is, when the dust settles and the scene is over, the guy is okay. A little pain for a while, but nothing that doesn't heal. And the message here to teenage boys watching shows like this is that even when the girls in your school do the very worst things they can do to you, you will be okay. Teenage girls are going to accuse boys of being creeps, perverts, and stalkers. That's almost inevitable. It's just one of those things teenage guys have to put up with. Girls have their things they have to deal with from guys. This is one that goes the other way. And a lot of guys freak out about it because they have no idea what to do in a situation like this. Some guys are too nervous to even approach a girl because they don't know what to do if she takes it the wrong way, which she most likely will when you're teens, and so they don't approach at all. In real life, what girls in schools will do is accuse the guy of being a creep, tell all of her friends, and do everything in her power to ruin his relationships, including the ones with girls he actually had a chance with. And even then, it'll be okay, because he'll graduate and go off to college with more mature women who hopefully won't do that sort of thing. The point of showing a girl assuming the worst and beating the snot out of the guy is to help guys get over this fear. The next thing you might notice about this trope is that whenever it appears in a rom-com, or a harem anime, or any situation where the girl who assaults the accidental pervert is a potential love interest, her being violent doesn't disqualify her from being the one the guy ends up with. Often as not, she ends up being the girl who gets the guy in the end. Sometimes this is because the writers are trying to appeal to the demographic who likes tsunderes. But other times, the guy simply forgave her for assaulting him. And usually, by this point in the series, she's stopped being violent and is acting more civil. As with all tropes, sometimes the accidental pervert is written into a script because the writers are lazy, or it's just a case of bad writing. But other times, the point of a trope like this is to show character growth. There's two lessons here. One, the girls who accuse you of perving on them in high school will grow out of it with time. Teenagers are dumb and immature, and that goes for the girls as much as it does for the boys. And you should forgive teens for the stupid stuff they do, because they don't know any better. I hear a lot of women who complain about this trope specifically list the fact that the guy ending up with the violent girl must be an idiot or something for choosing that girl over one of the ones who didn't try to slice his head off with a katana. But the thing is, cartoon violence aside, if men actually held grudges over women for falsely accusing either them or other guys of being creeps and perverts, we would have to write off about half of all women on the planet. And there's not a guy out there who doesn't remember doing something dumb around women that we wouldn't want them to hold over us forever. So let's look at our list of lessons again. The accidental pervert trope serves the following purposes. 1. It shows teenage girls a really good example of how not to act. 2. It teaches boys that they will be okay if the girls they like accuse them of being creeps. 3. It teaches boys that girls will grow out of this behavior in time. And 4. It teaches boys to forgive the girls who do things like this, partly because they're young and dumb, just like the boys. Like it or not, this trope was incredibly important for a lot of kids' development in Japan. Now that I think about it, it was sorely lacking in America. I kind of wish we had teenage cartoons where the accidental pervert showed up more often, now that I know what it was for. Yes, on the surface level, this trope can easily be mistaken for laziness on the part of the writer, and some writers are using this trope with no idea what it's actually for. But you can say that about literally anything that gets used a lot in media. I might have to delve into the nature of tropes and how they get so prevalent in the first place, but that'll be a later video. But complaints about this trope have started to die down, and if you read the title of this video, you probably already know where I'm going with this. The accidental pervert seems to have become something of a rarity among new shows in recent years. A generous interpretation is that the creators behind these shows have been listening to the fans in America and stopped using this trope purely because, no, that's not it. Remember Persona 5? Remember Kamoshida, the sports coach who was taking advantage of his students? Yeah, that happens quite a bit in real life. All over the world, really. But Kamoshida is widely believed to have been based off of the real-life Olympic judo athlete Masato Uchisiba, who was outed for exploiting his students in 2011. While it is true that most of the accusations teenage girls make are an overreaction or a mistake, girls will be girls, sometimes they turn out to be true. And sometimes they're true in the worst way possible. Parents were understandably upset, and the idea that women make false accusations has become, to an extent, a taboo topic in the country. It's not so bad that you can't get away with making a show like Rising of the Shield Hero over there, where the princess is making a false accusation out of deliberate malice, but the idea that teenage girls are just oversensitive to stuff like this is not as well received as it used to be. It's still okay to have an anti-role model like Princess Mine, because lying is bad. But an anti-role model like the girls who are just mistaken has people concerned that girls who watch shows like that won't report incidents in real life when they actually happen. I'm not going to go into the political details, but Japan has had their own version of the Me Too movement, and like in America, it started out in the schools and universities, and eventually bled out into the workplace. And like in America, people have gone completely insane. First, the idea that a person is innocent until proven guilty, that's primarily an American thing born out of the days of the witch trials when we all realized how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Other countries have adopted it on paper, but not always in practice. Heck, when it comes to things like the Me Too movement, even America forgets that part of our culture and history. In America, the Constitution only applies to the government. Neither the state nor the federal government can find you guilty of a crime without a trial, and the burden of proof is reasonable doubt. That's the reason why so many Me Too claims are made in civil courts, where the burden is preponderance of the evidence, which in these cases usually just means the woman says he did it, and we believe her more than the guy. The other way claims that a guy is a creep, stalker, or in some other way making women uncomfortable are made is in private organizations, such as gyms, the workplace, churches, or other private clubs. The Constitution doesn't affect them, so they can kick the guy out of their private club, or at least heavily restrict him when he's on their property. And if a culture throws the presumption of innocence out the window, the Fifth Amendment doesn't really matter. In Japan, they have the presumption of innocence on paper, but in practice they get around it with prolonged pretrial detention, often without bail. They rely heavily on confessions, which are arguably coerced, and their culture largely believes in the presumption of guilt, even if the law says otherwise. Ever wonder why in Ace Ventura games you can't just prove the defendant innocent? You also have to find the person who actually committed the crime? This is why. And so, if you get accused in Japan of something like stalking or sexual harassment, you're not likely to go to prison, because it isn't a serious enough crime for that. But you still will lose your job, or get kicked out of school, or banned from private clubs. And just like in America, the accidental pervert trope doesn't really work in a culture that's on the edge like this. You know how I said one of the points of this trope is to teach boys that they will be okay if a girl accuses them of being a creep and making her uncomfortable? Yeah, those are gone now. Remember that story of Artemis? The one where she turns Actaeon into a creature that can't defend himself and he gets ripped apart by his own friends? Yeah, scrub away the supernatural elements, and that's basically what women are doing to guys in both America and Japan. And I know what women who watch this video are probably thinking. The solution to a guy's problem is probably just, don't be a creep. Here's why that doesn't work. There are psychologists who have dedicated their entire careers to the question of how men cannot be creepy around women and how we can avoid making women uncomfortable. And the answer that they've all come to is, drumroll please, be attractive and don't be unattractive. And if you are unattractive, make sure you don't show any signs of attraction to the women around you. Basically, scientists have proven what everyone already knew and have been making Saturday Night Live skits about for ages. That's about 90% of it, anyway. Arguably, the other 10% is things like read body language, don't corner women with your body, don't follow women around the grocery store and try to sniff them. Things that most men either never do or learn not to do with time and experience. Usually after they're done going through their awkward teenage years. But even then, a lot of psychologists argue that the 10% doesn't matter if the woman finds the guy attractive. And while a lot of psychologists have said that women mostly aren't bothered by the guy until he shows interest in her, a lot of other psychologists say that women can tell when the guy is interested even if he hasn't said or done anything. And again, this makes a lot of sense if you think about it in terms of monkey logic. As I said before, if a guy shows interest in a girl and she's not attracted to him, then even if he never makes a move, she's going to be worried that he might eventually snap and try something. But if she likes him back, she doesn't really have a problem, even if he does do stuff that would be grounds for sexual harassment. And remember, the monkey who overreacted to possible threats got to live, while the monkey who underreacted got killed. Now, some people would argue that the best option is for guys to do everything in their power to be as attractive as possible to hedge their bets. And while that probably does explain the looks maxing that Gen Z has been doing, I think we all know that's not really a solution. Even in the best case scenario, where you somehow have perfect knowledge and maturity on these things as early as 14 years old, and perfect genetics to go with it, you are not going to be everyone's type. That doesn't happen. I don't fault teenage girls for doing any of this, because they don't and cannot be expected to know any better. And I know there are lots of girls who never accuse guys of creeping on them without a good reason. But from a guy's perspective, it only takes one oversensitive girl to wreck everything, possibly even ruin his life. And he can't avoid crossing the line because there is no line. Whether a girl feels uncomfortable in his presence or not is largely subjective. It's not under his control. And let me ask you this. When you were a kid, was there ever a time when you lost something or misplaced a toy, and you immediately assumed someone stole it? Don't be embarrassed. We all had that phase, and then we grew out of it. And when you accused other kids of stealing your stuff, the adults around you probably told you it was just missing, and they didn't take your accusations seriously. Imagine if they did. Imagine if every adult in your life believed you when you said that some other kid stole your missing backpack, or pencil, or whatever. And they took it as seriously as if the other kid had committed a crime. And they did this for years. Do you think you would ever grow out of that phase? Try to imagine a 25-year-old who is still accusing people of taking his stuff whenever he misplaces things. Do you think that if he hasn't grown out of it by 25 that he ever will? Now apply this to teenage girls accusing the guys around them of stalking or harassing them. Do you think if all of the adults around them take these accusations seriously, they're going to grow out of it? I know women in their late 20s who still can't tell the difference between a stalker and a guy who just takes the same bus every morning because they work in the same part of town. Do you think those women are ever going to grow out of that? And finally, remember when I said that boys should forgive the teenage girls who call them creeps in high school because they don't know any better? Well, there's two problems with that. One, it's easier to forgive someone when the damage they do is minimal, or they at least try to repair what they've broken. A teenager who just got their driving license who crashes into your mailbox and apologizes for it is easy to forgive. A teenager who drives onto your yard, does donuts on your lawn for several minutes, tearing up the grass, runs over your dog and kills him, and then doesn't even bother to apologize for it is a lot harder to forgive. And we do a terrible disservice to people who've been wronged when we ask them to forgive when there have been no attempts to fix the damage. You turn them into the bad guy, instead of the idiot who ran over their dog. An apology comes with it the indication that the person isn't going to do it again, and preventing further harm is something we've thrown right out the window. The second problem with forgiving the teenage girls is that it's no longer reasonable to say that they don't know any better. Too many cases of falsely accused guys managing to prove that the accusations were, in fact, false, after going through hell from their accuser, have been plastered all over the media. But it's not just the media. A female high school student knows at this point that the guys around her are on high alert, trying to avoid being accused of anything. At this point, the teenage girls know what they're doing, and they're doing it anyway. So, I've listed all the reasons why the accidental pervert trope isn't showing up as often in media. Now I want to talk to you about why we need to bring the trope back. If you've paid any attention to Japan and news about problems in their culture as of late, you might have heard about women's only buses. As the name suggests, these are buses that are for women only, meant to give them safe transport where they can't be groped or harassed by men. Now, it is possible that these exist because the bus companies are trying to hedge their bets and avoid dealing with accusations that they really can't do anything about. They don't want to be involved in a lawsuit, and they also want their customers to feel safe. However, I suspect that what's actually happening is that there's been a rise in legitimate harassment in Japan, just as I've started to notice here in the United States. All of my female friends and family who are willing to talk to me about this have told me that they've seen an increase not only in the number of guys who do these kinds of creepy things in public, but also in the scope of crazy things that they do, like following them around the grocery store, grabbing women by the shirt and pulling them in close to sniff them, and overturning the pineapple stand in the produce section while throwing a fit because a girl said that she wouldn't sleep with him. Not that she wouldn't go out with him. She refused to sleep with him because she was married. At first, this was absolutely baffling to me. Why would men do this in the post-Me Too era? But the more I applied my lawyer brain to it, the more I've realized what's really going on. When it comes to following the rules of a society, people will obey as long as the consequences of complying with the rule are better than the consequences of non-compliance. In short, the punishment has to be worse than the cost of obeying the law. So, you have every private organization that can get away with it treating men who are actively looking to find a girlfriend like they're perverts, functionally no different than a stalker or a sex pest, by merit of not wanting to die alone. Anyone with a working brain can figure out the problem here. Men have to be able to find a girlfriend somewhere, and every place wants to say, do it somewhere else. And society has more or less made it clear that they do not care about whether men actually get dates, which in turn makes men not care about what society thinks of them. In short, men will follow the rules of a society like this when they have to, but as soon as they find a loophole, they're going to take full advantage of it. And grocery stores are the loophole in America. There's no easy way to stop men from approaching women there, and there's no easy way for women to complain and get the man banned from the store. In Japan, the bus seems to be the same thing. If you see a cute girl and ask her out, and she says no, there is no HR department for her to lodge a complaint. And that has the benefit of men not needing to worry, but it also has the downside of men not needing to be on their best behavior. Another reason men didn't used to throw pineapples everywhere when they got rejected was because they had at least a modicum of respect for women. Even if the law or the rules of a private company can't get to you, having respect for other people will keep you from harassing them. But have you ever tried to respect someone who is still acting like an immature teenager well into their adult years? A really entitled one who doesn't even respect your right to exist? It just doesn't work. And it doesn't help that women have been saying for decades that they don't want to be judged on their appearance, while they're judging men as creeps primarily because of their appearance. No one respects a hypocrite. I get that not all women are doing these things, but neither are all men stalking women in the grocery store. There's a lot of people out there who don't have the time or the brain power to distinguish between the good ones and the bad, and that applies to both sexes. Next, you have words like creep, which are losing their power over men. The last few decades of media filled every guy with dread over the idea of being accused of stalking. They were the bad guys in every rom-com, and creeps were universally hated. The first time you get called a creep, it's terrifying. The first time you get called into a campus security office, you're sweating bullets. But if you come out standing, you learn a few things. First, you need to start recording every interaction you have with women going forward. Most states don't have laws about recording in public. It's private interactions that are covered. And you can usually record audio without consent, even if you can't get video, because recording laws are mostly about preventing spicy pictures from ending up online. I recommend an app called Voice Recorder. I've used it not only to record interactions with women, but also to record a pastor who called me in because of a complaint and caught him in multiple lies and even exposed him to several members of his own congregation. Members who used to tithe. Very useful. 10 out of 10 review. The second thing you learn is that being called a creep isn't as bad as you were led to believe. The first time it happens, it shatters your opinion of yourself. Your entire sense of identity gets smashed into pieces. But then you start to notice the kinds of guys women are actually interested in. What makes them think a guy is creepy or not? These are not mature, adult women with clear criteria of what makes a man a creep. These are children with adult bodies who will jump into the arms of an abusive rich guy who's an actual stalker if he happens to look like Christian Grey. After a while, their boos mean nothing because you've seen what makes them cheer. Fear of a thing is often worse than the thing itself, and that fear goes away after so many times. There are even guys I know who've started embracing the label of creep, because if you're going to get called that anyway, why not? To quote Homelander, if you can't be loved, why not try being feared? And finally, as a result of women crying wolf too many times, people are fed up. And now that fewer people are going to come running when a woman calls for help, the real wolves out there are starting to take notice. This paints a really scary picture of our current environment, and while I haven't been able to get clear numbers on whether there actually is a rise in genuine sexual harassment in either America or Japan, I do believe that something to that extent is happening. And at the same time, women are becoming more immature on average, long past the point when they should grow up, and that's not good for anyone. And I wish I didn't have to say this, but all of this is bad. All of this is absolutely awful for men, women, men who have sisters and daughters and nieces, and women who have sons and brothers and nephews. This is horrible in every possible direction. So you're probably wondering, is there anything that we could do that could reverse some of this damage? Well, there is one thing. All joking aside, there's an important lesson in here on why a cliche sticks around and why it might even be important. It isn't just good stories and high-quality art with sophisticated jokes that matter to a culture. Sometimes a barrage of lowbrow humor and cliches can change lives for the better. And on that note, today's featured game is called Until Then. It's a cross between a visual novel and a point-and-click adventure game focusing on, fittingly enough, teen drama. Set in a high school in the Philippines, you've got Mark, the main character, and his friends, all of whom have a crush on one girl named Louise who they've placed on a pedestal, with predictable results. And there are time loop shenanigans, and multiple endings, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. There's not really another game I can think of to compare it to. It's not as dark as Amori. The minigames remind me a little bit of Undertale, but the similarities end there. But maybe the fact that I can't find another game like Until Then is a point in its favor. It's a good game, and I'd recommend it to anyone who likes virtual novels. Alright, that's all I have for today. Thank you all, and goodbye.